Another camera! This is the Canonet QL17 GIII, which I bought for parts. Turns out it does work, but I need to disassemble it so I can clean and re-lubricate the shutter speed escapement. In order to do that, the top and bottom plates need to come off, which entails removing a lot of hardware from the top plate, but not much from the bottom plate. You can find plenty of guides for this from other creators, so I won't go into too much detail here. Side note, look at this light seal foam. Ugh. Anyway, once the rest of the hardware is off, the top plate is just held in with 3 screws. And it begins. The bottom plate has just 2 screws holding it in, but once you get it off, you need to watch out for the battery door and the spring next to it. I didn't think too much about the order that I did things in, so this is when I took the leatherette off. I use isopropyl alcohol to loosen the glue, and then I use my tweezers to get the leatherette itself off. And ignoring the continuity error, I'll use a lens wrench to loosen this ring which holds the nameplate in. Once it's loose, it can just be spun out. Lifting the nameplate out reveals the aperture plate. This controls the light entering the light meter depending on the shutter speed selected. Now, this is where things get tricky. There are 2 lens groups, and the first one comes out easily. It's just held in with this ring. The problem is with the second group. The notches that the tool needs to grab to loosen the lens are set so deep within the housing that a special tool is needed to reach them. So here's what I did. I bought a 32mm hole saw and modified it. And here's what it looks like all finished. Another reason why the lens is so hard to get out is that it's lightly glued into place. Anyway, with it loosened, a pair of tweezers can get it out the rest of the way. More continuity errors, and it's time to work on the main chassis again. These screws hold plates which don't really have much functional value other than completing the shape of the camera and providing protection to the mechanisms. With those removed, we can focus on getting the lens board out. Before we can take out the screws holding the lens itself, we need to unlink it from the surrounding hardware. These 2 screws connect the shutter button to the lens, and you need to be a bit careful because in between these 2 plates, there's usually a washer which you do not want to lose. Next, we need to unclip this spring from the frameline shadow mask, otherwise it'll go flying when we remove the lens board. And it can help to tape it into place as well. And now we can remove the 4 screws holding in the lens board, of which there are 2 types. The last screw is hidden behind a piece of metal, which can be moved out of the way by partially winding the shutter. And with these 4 screws removed, we can very carefully remove the lens board assembly, making sure the 2 contacts at the top don't run into the rangefinder assembly. The lens is still held in by 2 wires, so we'll need to unsolder those. Now, we need to remove this rectangular shroud, but for some reason I decided to remove this lens group first. This would be easier if done afterwards, but anyway, there are 2 screws which hold the shroud into place, and they're hidden unless the focus ring is in the right place. This took me way too long to discover, but once you know, they can be removed and the shroud lifted away. Now, can you tell me what's wrong here? Yeah, no amount of WD-40 is going to change the fact that this is a left-hand thread. And it's weird because, as far as I know, this is only the case on the GIII models. Anyway, The ring can now be removed, but to be honest, I probably should have done this way later because soldering needs to happen and removing this ring actually separates the lens from the lens board, only the wires are still holding it, so it's in the same position, only not securely, so it's just wobbling around as I'm trying to solder. Anyway, most of these wire groups have brackets holding them down, so we can remove those and continue desoldering. The wires up by the meter needle are covered by a piece of tape. On some versions I think this is foam instead of tape, but once that's removed we can desolder these two wires. With all the wires undone, the lens and lens board can be separated. Under the lens board there's a control ring and a bushing that can just be lifted off. Now moving to the front of the lens, we'll unscrew the CDS light cell. Then there's 3 screws holding this front housing in place. The shutter speed ring can also now be removed. It has a little arm that pokes into the lens to control it. And there's also the ISO ring. This has some contacts on it that interface with this circuit down here. And that can just be simply unscrewed. Now on the side of the lens we'll remove this outer cover. It contains a small covering which keeps dust out of the self-timer escapement. And then there are even more brackets on the back and the front. Then once we remove these 3 screws, the light cell and its PCB can be lifted out, and the wires along with it. Now there are just 2 screws holding the next plate on, and when we remove it, the aperture ring can also be removed. We're very close now. We just need to remove this cam and lever. The lever on this side is on a slotted shaft, so no need to worry about realigning it. We can slide the shaft out the other side, then there's 4 screws, one of which is a flathead. Finally, we can cock the shutter and reveal the escapements. Here's all the parts laid out that we've taken off so far. And let's work on this shutter. This is the main cam, and it can just be lifted out. This pin is how the shutter is tripped, and oh, look at how poorly this is running. Yeah, that should not be hesitating like that. Let's fix it. This is the click spring, and it just lifts right out. There are 2 screws holding the shutter speed escapement in place. On older versions there are 3. But once we get those out, the escapement will just lift right out. So, let's see how this is running. It looks fine right now, but when I engage the pallet fork on the left, then it grinds to a halt. So, here's what I'll do. I'll take some isopropyl alcohol and just dip the entire escapement in it to knock loose any old oil or debris on the gears. And it's actually kind of working better already, but let's get this oiled and see how much better it'll work. So how I like to do this is to make a drop of oil on one of the flat plates, then use my tweezers to draw a line for the oil to follow to flow into the pivot. Some people may not approve of this method because it might over-oil the pivot, but I really like to do it this way personally. And once all the joints are oiled, look at how well this runs now. Now we'll repeat the same process on the self-timer unit. It's just held in with this tiny snap ring, and of course it goes flying. Now this is interesting. That little fork on the right, that used to have a little locking screw so the unit was held in 2 places. In fact, really old versions only used this screw. So I think that's interesting that they removed it. Now to actually get this unit out, we need to unhook this spring and move this lever so the flat edge across from it doesn't interfere with the housing. Like that. Then it can be lifted right out like the other escapement. We'll repeat the same process we did on the shutter speed escapement for this one, cleaning it with isopropyl alcohol and relubricating it. When replacing this unit, watch out that this little lever on the bottom doesn't hit the housing as it's going in. Then reclip this spring. Nice. I lost this snap ring both times I've worked on a camera which used one, and both times it was stuck to my finger. Now there's two washers which go underneath the shutter speed escapement. Probably should have mentioned that when removing it, but we'll just replace them like this. Then the shutter speed escapement itself can be replaced. Make sure the washers don't get lost under the escapement as you do this. You see this wobble? That's because this lever down here is caught, so when you free that, then there's no wobble. Being now wobble free, we can screw it back down and see it work. We can now replace this click spring and work on getting the shutter speed cam back into place. When you have it roughly aligned, you should be able to wind the shutter, and these cam followers should move with the cutouts on the cam. The last step is to pull back on the click spring so that it engages correctly. Once it's in place, it should hold the cam fairly strongly. It'll be helpful later on to turn the shutter speed cam to one side so that you know where the cutout is that the shutter speed ring needs to engage with when it needs to be replaced. And now it's time to do everything else backwards, starting with this cover plate. Make sure the shutter is cocked so that the arm on the mainspring can align with this cutout, then screw everything back down, remembering the position of the flathead screw. Then we can replace the rod and the lever that goes on it, along with its spring. Make sure to replace the spring so that the upward bent end goes on top. These two levers should be aligned like so. And then you can rehook the spring. The next plate sits on the other side and has two screws to secure it. We can now fish the wires back into place and fasten down the light cell and its PCB. And of course there's always more brackets. Now this outer ring can go back in and... oh no. I completely forgot to put the aperture ring in. Well, that's 15 minutes I have to go back and redo. See, it's supposed to just go in right before that silver plate. It didn't even have any hardware. Only thing to note is making sure this contact doesn't get caught at all. Anyway, let's not forget this dust shield when replacing this outer ring. We can screw down this wiper contact, replace the ISO ring, and of course the all-important shutter speed ring. This is where knowing the position of the shutter speed cam is helpful. Now the front shroud with its 3 screws, and we can screw down the light cell while we're here. And the control ring with its bushing. And we can now fish these wires through. And reunite the lens and the lens board. Stinking left-hand thread. And finally, we can resolder these wires. Before replacing the lens onto the camera body. And after spending way too long wrangling wires, deciding that it only feels like the lens is crushing one wire instead of all of them. And of course I forgot this lens, so let's just carefully... Okay, never mind. And after 8 hours of repairing, here it is. Test shots will probably be on the community page at some point.